Hey everybody, how you doing? My name is Slug Useless, and I am the owner-operator of Disillusion Music Label, and I am in my new studio, Disillusion Studios, and I've been asked to do an interview about two former bands I was in, the Corporate Whores and Useless Pieces of Shit, for Emocaust Videozine. So let's get started. Well, the Corporate Whores did come from Pink Dancing Elephant, but to even go farther back, we went by the name of Spiroplastic Tubing. And this was when the personnel still wasn't worked out. With Spiroplastic Tubing, it was the Inhuman Joel Shankenberg on drums, and it was Pretty Strange Phil Pratt on bass, and then I played guitar under the pseudonym of Dare Dentist. I called myself Dare Dentist because I inflicted pain with my guitar. So that was the original lineup, and then the guy who ended up being the bass player, Matt Griffin, he joined the band, and we were briefly called Pink Dancing Elephant. And then we got him to move to Tucson. He was living in Yuma with his parents, and at that point we had the what I like to call the power trio, where it was Matt on bass, Pretty Strange on drums, and I played guitar. And we did that for a few gigs, and then we decided we wanted a singer, and unfortunately we didn't make a good choice. But we got this guy named Bill Dozer, and he filled the slot for a short while, but he was not the best choice on our part. But as far as the music goes, at the time we were listening to bands like Throbbing Grizzle and The Residents and Cluster and Eno, and basically the music just came out. We didn't plan anything. It was just a music form that we just made up as we went along. And for the most part, we didn't even know really we were doing anything punk. We were just doing what we were doing, and then people would say, "Hey, you guys are punk rock." And we also intimidated a lot of people because we gave the the illusion that we were really punk rock and they were posers, but we never judged them. They just got defensive about us. We were trying to do something really original, and I think we accomplished that. So we were lacking good equipment. We had some skills, but obviously it was limited by our equipment choices. We didn't even have enough mics. We used to use a set of headphones as a mic, and our bass cabinet was this big cabinet that could hold like 10 speakers, and I think we had 3 that actually worked. Eventually, as the speakers blew, we would use them for noise effects, where you could just blast it and it'd be ripped and it would make these really cool noises. But yeah, that was why the music was the way it was. And also, as far as our motivation, we were just really pissed off. It was, the beginning of the Reagan era, and basically the beginning of the downfall of America. And we were just pissed, and there was nothing that we could do about what was going on. So that was reflected in our music. Well, it was when Matt moved to Tucson and we became a band that practiced regularly. Before that, we were kind of having personnel changes and personnel problems, but at that point, we got it to work. And the reason why we call it the Corporate Whores was because at the time, both Phil and I worked for this place called U.S. High Reach, and they basically rented scaffolding for construction jobs and stuff. And it was owned by a corporation that bought it because they wanted it as a tax write-off. And when I first started there, it was when I first got to Tucson, they had just had like a record year, and that wasn't what the corporation wanted that owned the company. They wanted it to lose money. So as soon as I got hired, the first thing they did was they basically got rid of all the salesmen. So of course, that hurt sales. And they had projects that they were already committed to, so that's what they were working on, and they were slowly just working towards shutting the place down, which they did like 2 or 3 years later. I can't remember exactly the time frame, but it was our first introduction to like how fucked up corporations can be, where they would just do the stupidest shit and not think it through as far as on the employee level. So anyways, we thought of ourselves as corporate whores because that's what we had to do to make money. Needless to say, we didn't work for those companies very long. Well, I don't remember hearing anything similar, but we were definitely influenced by the Husker Du album Land Speed Record. They came to Tucson, and Phil and I went to see them at the backstage, and we were impressed with them because they just played their whole set. They didn't stop in between songs and say, this one's about this and this one's about that. They just fucking shredded for like 45 minutes nonstop. And we were like, wow, that's what we want to do. And then we were also heavily influenced by the first Dead Kennedys album, which was just really well done. And then we had other influences like the Residents and some noise bands and a bunch of German electronic bands, which doesn't seem to make sense, but they were kind of noisy too. And we weren't necessarily trying to make the Corporate Whores a noise band. It was just, we didn't know what we were doing, and that's the way it sounded. And we liked it. Well, part of what it was that we were trying to say something without being preachy, which is kind of hard to do when you're in a band. But that was what that was all about. The outside influences were just how fucked everything was, which is kind of sad because things are now in the United States are like far, far, far worse than they were then. Then it was more like they were setting up the ground for what is going on now. Trump is like taking trickle down to the extreme. But let's not talk about politics because that's just too depressing. The Corporate Whores, we had limited resources. We never toured out of town ever. And as far as in Tucson, at the backstage, the shows were kind of monopolized by these 2 bands, Civil Death and Conflict, which you might have heard Conflict. They did a record. But so we were always set to be the opening band. And sometimes there would be a third band, like a touring band that would come. So basically they would want us to play when no one was there. And most of the time we did play when no one was there. But so we never really, if you went to Tucson today, you'd find very few people even knew or saw the Corporate Whores. And we transitioned into other stuff, which I'll get into later. So no one knew who the Corporate Whores were. This friend of ours, Lee Joseph, who ran Iconoclast music label, he was really into us though. So he did a recording of us, and we released the tape Revenge of the Whores. So the Revenge of the Whores, we kind of were vague about the name because we were kind of like in the between Corporate Whores and Useless Pieces of Shit. Basically, we didn't spread it very well. We didn't know what the fuck we were doing. So, other than the Revenge of the Whores tape, which I guess got around in places outside the country, in the United States, no one really cared about the Corporate Whores. So, once again, this is because we didn't have any technology. We had like maybe one microphone and a shitty bass setup, and I think I played guitar through this little tiny PV amp that I used, and and the drum set was just, barely being held together. It was probably like some Montgomery Ward's or J.C. Penney or something drum set, but it was what we had. So we had to be creative. We didn't have multi-tracking, so what we did is we had multiple cassettes. So what we would do is we would like record something on one cassette. So you have two right and left channels, so we would use them as track 1, track 2. So we record on that and then play that back on a portable cassette player and put it inside a bag, a paper bag, and hang a mic right down into the bag. So that, and then meanwhile we would have, so that would be recording on one side of the cassette, and then we would have one more track. So basically we would have 3, maybe 4 tracks if we were lucky, but that's, we never really had any kind of multi-tracking abilities, and back then that kind of equipment was really inhibitive to buy. Eventually we did go that route, but that was much after that. Well, like what I said before, this is something that all just happened. We didn't really plan it out. Actually, the way we ended up even going out and gigging was there was this guy in Tucson. He was referred to as JoJo Fishhead, and he found out that at the time Phil lived in this crazy, super fancy house, because it was in this part of town where they were gonna. It was this cool neighborhood. It was kind of rural, but it was in the city. You'd see rabbits and quail running around and stuff. And so he had this one room, and we would just go in there every day, and we would just fuck around in there. So that's kind of where it started. And then this guy, JoJo Fishhead, heard about us somehow, I don't know how, and he came to that house, which was way far away from everything, so I'm not even sure how that happened. But he said, "Hey, you guys are a band. Let me be your singer, and we'll book some shows." So we were like, "Oh, okay, sure." Well, he booked us shows at the backstage like right away. So we went and played with JoJo Fishhead as our lead singer. He was the first lead singer, and he just fucking went nuts on stage. He was like pulling his pants down, taking his dick out, and going and waving into people's faces and stuff. And that kind of made people notice us, but it didn't necessarily do anything to promote the band. And then he ended up just like burning out, like getting into drugs and everything. And then he eventually moved away, and we went back to being a 3-piece. Yeah, we weren't really trying to experiment. It was just, we didn't know what we were doing, so we were just doing whatever happened. If you want to call it experimental, sure, why not? And the electronic part, we didn't really do that kind of stuff because we didn't have the equipment to do it. We had a Casio keyboard, an MT30 or something, and then we had the VL Tone, the little tiny Casio thing that you could do rhythms on and stuff, and that's all we had. We didn't really have much as far as trying to be an electronic band. I never imagined that would happen. It was really exciting that they were interested in doing that, and I was like, sure, why not? So once again, I think in Europe these sold well. I don't think anyone in the United States really even cared or knew who we were. But it felt really good to have that and to share it with my bandmates and such. And well, basically there wasn't a lot of tracks, but we had a CD re-release that I did before that, and that's where he got most of his ideas for which music he wanted to use. Basically, we had some some songs that were like representative of the way we sounded when we played out, and all of those were on there. And then he cherry picked some of the obscure noise kind of things that we did and added that to it. Well, one of the things that influenced us was this record from Finland called Propaganda, and it had all these really cool Finnish hardcore bands on it, and it was in Finnish, so you didn't understand the lyrics, which sometimes I think is a blessing, because sometimes the lyrics can be kind of juvenile or too political. But we really liked that, and we really tried to emulate what those guys were doing. So the Swine Courage is not available. That was kind of a greatest hits of everything that the Corporate Whores had to offer at the time. It was 2 big CDs of cool music. And then Voodoo Economics is still available. That was basically, it's not super political, but probably our first try at doing something political that mattered. But it's still available, and I still think it's one of the best things that we did. Well, the Festering Sessions, or the Festering Sores, was, we lived in this house. There's not a lot to do in Tucson. It's really hot. This house had like really good cooling, so we would just hang out, smoke pot, and make weird music. And it wasn't like anybody ever sat down and wrote a song or anything like that. It was just what came out of us. And then also, if anyone came over to our house, we would like put an instrument in their hand and say, all right, write a song, we're going to do it right now. And a lot of these people were not musicians, and a lot of them were like blown away by what we were trying to accomplish. But so that was kind of what became the Festering Sessions. And the way it started was before the Corporate Whores ever existed, at Phil's house, we did this thing called the Clubfoot Telethon, which was not televised. It was just something that we did, and it was kind of the beginning of the Festering Sores. It was the same kind of thing where anybody who came over, we made them do a performance on it and recorded it all. Unfortunately, it was on 2-track reel-to-reel, and we lost that. So it's one of the problems when you're young punk rockers. You don't necessarily know how to keep stuff good. Well, a lot of it, the noisy, crude part of it was definitely, once again, just a lack of having the equipment that like nowadays people take for granted. Like what I'm surrounded with here, I could do a lot just by myself. And back then we were just trying to make do with what we had. And that was the illusion that we tried to put in the music too, that it was like more thought out and better than what it actually was. I don't really know what a lot of people thought about it in Tucson, but we enjoyed doing it, and it was kind of a precursor to the next thing that we were going to do. Well, I definitely think that is inseparable, but I wouldn't necessarily call the Corporate Whores a political band. Voodoo Economics was definitely a political release, and it was basically about the futility of even participating in the government, which unfortunately now with Trump, there probably won't be any more democratic elections. Basically, what happened was, no one could understand our music, so we decided that we needed to and I don't mean to sound cocky about this, but we needed to dumb it down and make it more just like punk rock hardcore. And also at the time, Lenny Mello, who is still a very popular figure in punk rock and in Tucson, he wanted to be our singer. And he had a big following and was a big personality, and everybody knew him. And basically, we set up a band with him, and then we kind of like adjusted what we were doing to fit the roles that you want in a hardcore band. And then we played our first gig as a 4-piece, and then after that we had another person, a second guitarist, join us, Paul Young, and we went as a 5-piece for a while, and then we went on our first tour, we went as a 4-piece again with Lenny at the vocals. And yeah, and UPS was very popular. Everyone liked, a lot of it was because Lenny was in the band, but also we did a lot of crazy shit. We realized we needed to do stuff to get attention, so we did lots of stuff. Nothing really that bad or anything. It was just that we obtained this reputation of being bad, which we never really did anything, but it kind of backfired on us because we could never get shows anywhere because people thought we were a bunch of 6'5" skinheads that were going to fuck shit up, which is as far as from what we were as possible. The release is great because, you know, basically there's a record of, no pun intended, a record of what we did with the Corporate Whores, which I was always proud of, but not too many people even knew anything about it at all. Well, Phil and myself have continued to do stuff. I even started a musical label, Disillusion Music. I had a drawer full of cassettes from the 80s of bands that no one had ever heard of that were in Tucson. So I thought they needed to be released. And then there was more UPS material that hadn't been released, and there was more Corporate Whores material that hadn't been released. So what I did was I just digitized all that stuff and started releasing CDs, which a lot of the stuff you can see at disillusionmusiclabel.com or uselesspiecesofshit.com. So it was good to get all that stuff digitized and released. As far as the members go, Matt moved to Massachusetts, and Lenny is still active. He has a band in Tucson that he sings for, and personally, he's probably more popular than he was when he was in UPS. And then our first drummer, Dog, he moved to LA and has been very successful in LA. And ironically enough, he was in a Christian rock band, which is hilarious. But and then our second drummer, Chris, he was great. He was a great drummer, but he had a drug problem, and he lived on the streets for like 30 years in Tucson, and he died last year. So yeah, he was a great drummer. I mean, he didn't have to teach him anything. I don't know how many people are familiar with Ginger Baker, but I think that would be a good comparison to Chris O'Brien. Yeah, he was a great drummer, but he just kind of faded away and spent, believe it or not, 30 years living on the streets, and then finally died on the streets. Yeah, that's a sad story that I don't really want to go into any more about. Well, when I finally got all this technology, Apple Logic and a computer and a interface, and yeah, it was it made a big change for me. I guess my solo stuff has never been super punk rock, but it's definitely can get noisy. So yeah, it's just something that I do. I'm still doing it. I've had some health issues, so I haven't done a lot recently. But now that I have built my new studio, I'm ready to get back to work, and I have a couple releases under the name Art Vandal that I need to finish up and release. One of them is Art Vandal's Old Timey Hits, and it's basically some covers of some old punk rock songs that I've done my crazy version of. So basically, what happened back in the 80s was there was a lot of cool things musically that happened, but a lot of it has just been lost to time. So I feel good about re-releasing a lot of the music that I re-released, and I feel good about the new music that I'm doing also. So between the two, it keeps me busy. But we'll have to see what the future brings. I'm definitely not going to get rich doing this, that's for sure. I haven't sold a CD in a couple of years. People don't buy CDs anymore, they do downloads. But the funny part is that I did have a cassette release that I put together that I couldn't keep in stock, which is kind of weird that people are into cassettes again, because the sound isn't the greatest with the cassettes. But anyhow, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks again for allowing me to do this interview, and I hope I didn't ramble too much. Thanks to everybody, and go to disillusionmusiclabel.com and you can find out more. And so thanks again. Bye.